Olafur Eliasson needs little introduction. He is among the best-known contemporary artists. To call his installations immersive falls short. They absorb you into another world entirely. They fill 30,000 square foot halls. They mark skylines. His is a planet where light is ungoverned by familiar laws and that even prehistory can be reimagined. For, as any New Yorker can tell you, the Brooklyn Bridge predates all civilization. As for the artist himself, prehistory lies in Denmark. Born in Copenhagen in 1967, his father was also an artist and encouraged his talent. After studying at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, Olafur moved to the heart and soul of the art scene in the 90s, Berlin. Since the mid-90s, he's presented major exhibitions that have shaken up the art world. In 2003, he represented Denmark at the Venice Biennale with the Blind Pavilion. Later that year, he thrilled London with his first exhibit at the Tate, called The Weather Project. But his work doesn't just sit in museums, he's put a stamp on cities. He took over London's Kensington Gardens and brought waterfalls to the Brooklyn Bridge. Ice Watched brought the issue of climate change, and tons of melting Greenland icebergs fished out of the sea to the doorsteps of Paris and London. He's proved that leadership isn't just in government offices or in the C-suite. It can also be found in the studio of an artist. Today on Leaders with Lacqua, a conversation with Olafur Eliasson. Thank you so much and welcome to Bloomberg headquarters. Do you think art can actually change the world?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think art is not outside of the world, so art is actually a part of the world, and in that sense, it's a part of that big machine we call reality, and obviously art needs to make itself visible in order to have a share of the dialogue. But art, and I would maybe broaden it a bit and say culture, is a significant part of what we call civic society. So we have the private sector, we have the public sector, but we have a sort of civic society. And the role of culture in civic society is, of course, to give civic society the opportunity to sort of reevaluate, well, what do we actually think about this or that, or sort of think about what is our opinion, what do we think about what private sector and public sector ourselves is doing. So you sit in a theater, you look at art, you go to dance, a ballet maybe, and you look and you realize, this is what I think about something. Actually, now looking at this, I kind of know what I mean, and you know, it is almost as if this particular theater play or this artwork or that book, it said it for me. It was as if this book reflected a need I had to say something, but I just couldn't get around to sort of articulate it. So in that sense, culture, I really think it performs an amazing sort of listening sort of opportunity where society goes, well, what do I actually think about this? And is it a valid thought? And culture is that space in which you go like, I know what I think about this. This is my view.
But it crystallizes thoughts. Does it actually change opinions?
Well, it actually gives us a space, a safe space, a space where we can also have difficult conversations, like a museum. You walk into a museum, and a museum, the way I see it, is a safe space where we do not have to agree in order to be together. You say, I really don't like that red color, and I say, I actually like that red color, and we can still be friends. So as much as society might be polarizing and sort of falling out with each other, suddenly I see a situation where are the safe spaces where we can have what we normally find in parliamentary situations? Where do we debate not just what's right and wrong, but also, are we entitled to disagree and still be together, and how are we going to manage that? So in that sense, I think culture actually is a very hospitable, inclusive, and also very active thing. It's not just something you sit and ponder philosophically about. It's a real physical thing which out there. There's like so
well, your art is, not every art is.
I think we should also not polarize that in that sense. Let's just say one thing. In Europe, for instance, right? There's more people working in culture than in the car industry, including car salespeople. Think about that. It's like 2.5 times more people working and being paid, goes to work in the morning. You know, the size of that economy compared to the car industry it's twice or 2.5 times bigger. So if you think about it, culture is not just some kind of overcooked noodle at the periphery of society. It's a significant and interesting and intellectually motivating workforce. It's a part of society.
What are you trying to do with art? Is it mainly climate change, awareness?
I think I'm excited if I can make a work of art. I mean, that's hard enough already, right? And obviously I'm excited about collaborating with a number of people who are then bringing the artwork to a great precision and then into the world. And once it's in the world, it's not like over and then I'm done. Once it's in the world, you can say every artwork has agency, it has an errand that it's running. And my interest is to make sure that this errand is somewhat successful. So as an artist, I would like to think I am contributing to a dialogue. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm particularly unique. Me as a person, certainly, I'm not unique at all, but the artwork is actually something quite valuable. Not just mine, but art as such, right? So I would like to think that I'm contributing to a dialogue. I'm not alone, and it's not a manifesto, it's not a dogma I'm participating.
But you did Ice Watch, you can't stay on the fence once you see that. It's not about a dialogue, it's a showing that actually icebergs are melting around the world.
It was very much about the dialogue, I think. I made Ice Watch, that's true. I made it with a great team. I got support from great people. I had a lot of participants involved and so on and so forth. What is essentially this project was about to give data, give science, give what are the politicians talking about, to give it some tangible shape. And then you look at the ice and you go like, oh, this is what they're talking about. And of course I would like to say this is a work of art, I'm the artist, but what is more important what's more important here is that people go up to the ice and they go like, oh, it's really beautiful, oh, it's really touching. And then you put your hand on and go like, oh, it's also cold, as if you didn't know that. You can't know ice is cold. So there's so much going on there, and the way I see it, that is if not a dialogue, maybe negotiation or exchange. It's very dynamic, actually.
So you're not expecting people to go and sign a petition saying, to their MP saying, please make sure that CO2 goes down?
Well, if they would, that would not be so bad, would it? I mean, so it's not that there is a very precise outcome. Obviously, I think there's a sort of disbalance, for instance, when it comes to climate. It's very hard to actually, it's very hard to understand, well, what does that then actually mean? I mean, so what's going on, right? And obviously, everyone agrees that the big impact is going to be on the sort of the legislation level, right? It's the politicians, of course, once they decide to put carbon tariffs or carbon pricing, taxing on that, that's going to change a lot. The next thing is, what can I do as an individual? Well, it's like really small compared to that, but maybe there is a small equation between, can I actually influence the so-called macro decision, the politicians, the leaders, the heads of states, and can I, as a single person, what do I do? Well, I can mobilize people, I can create a sort of a movement, I can be part of an interest group, I can be a part of policy group and an advocacy group, and I could demonstrate, for instance. So there are things that we can do which creates some, from being alone into a collective, into a sort of a movement, and that starts then to push the greater political levels.
Up next, Olafur Eliasson on his weather exhibition that delighted London art-goers and what he's learned from audience interaction.
I was so surprised, as anybody, how people would sort of own the space and they would sort of occupy it. They would bring their own agendas, they would bring picnics. One brought a canoe, and it was like yoga classes, but also like kind of apocalypse.
The weather isn't just the temperature outside or the most common source of small talk in England. It also was the inspiration behind Olafur Eliasson's seminal project. A mist permeated the turbine halls, while bright lights and color transformed the space into a vast landscape. In 2003, a giant glowing sun took residence inside the Tate Modern. It was called the Weather Project. Londoners held picnics inside the space, put on performances, did yoga, and even protested against the Iraq War as the art exhibition played with perceptions of what public space means. His next takeover of the Tate made audiences aware of their senses, the people around them, and the world beyond. In 2019, in real life, filled up Instagram feeds across London as gallery goers snapped images of themselves transported to another world in Olafur's creations. Works inside the exhibition included a moss wall, Beauty 1993, which created a rainbow inside the gallery. Your Blind Passenger plunged viewers into a fog-filled room, depriving them of their normal vision. The exhibition plays with the perception not just of the world, but of the individual. Your Uncertain Shadow cast chromatic shadows. Viewers saw their figures multiplied on that colorful wall and took snapshots of that image and shared it to their own social networks. So how does Olafur come up with his ideas, both big and small, and then execute them? When did you decide you wanted to be an artist?
My father was an artist, and I thought he was great. But obviously now I'm grown up, I realized that he gave me a lot. And I realized that it took me a little while to realize there are things I have to do better than him. So as much as he inspired me, I also need to learn other things as well. And there were times where I thought, okay, this sort of art thing, my God, that is impossible. But then...
Well, because it's hard.
Yeah, but also, but then it turns out that the other things you do in life is also, I mean, I'm happy I wouldn't be in your chair, because that's really difficult. Like, so essentially I ended up doing art because I wasn't really very good at much other stuff, to be honest. But
I find that hard to believe, but...
No, it's actually, that's not the case. And the thing is, I felt that with art I was able to participate, and it was very important for me to choose something where I was not marginalized or put aside, or it was not like, okay, suddenly I'm like on the periphery of society. It was I came from Scandinavia, so being a part of society and the whole welfare model and all of that, it was so important for me to choose something where I was contributing, or I was feeling a part of, not necessarily the most important part, but also part of something. Otherwise, I wouldn't know whether what I did was worth it. Right? It's very hard to be alone and then always believe in yourself. It's very hard.
When did you realize that you could actually make a living out of it?
Well, that took a long time, especially as I decided to not make things that are necessarily very, should I say, art market friendly. I was lucky to have a strong sort of public sector support for the arts out of Denmark. That actually has a thing to do with it. So I made things that was by definition not really sellable at all. I didn't have a sort of a gallery commercial infrastructure, and the art market wasn't very strong in the circles where I moved. So I didn't even think much about it. And then at some point, the first sort of late 90s or mid-late 90s, a kind of a so-called art collector bought a work of art, and I was like, whoa, this person must be crazy, because it's like, well, at the time I thought that's barely a work of art. Well, it doesn't really matter if it's a work of art. And then it just turns out, well, there are people out there who are like so committed, and they're so amazing to say, okay, I don't care how crazy this is, I just love it, and I'm just gonna build a collection, I'm gonna make a statement with that. And in that sense, so I didn't this whole thing with the so-called art market and the sort of the commodity of art, that was not a strong, I didn't have, it was so abstract and out of reach for me, it didn't really impact me a lot.
What surprised you in the Weather Project? So this was the big exhibition at the Tate with the sun.
Yes.
That kind of put you on the world map. I mean, people were having picnics.
Yes,
only Londoners maybe.
Yeah, that was in London. That was so exciting, of course, for me. I was a relatively young artist, and it was interesting because I was at the time very interested in the hospitality of public space. Like, what does public actually mean? Is it public something? And what's that defined by? Is it something we own together? Is it something we are allowed into, or is it actually ours? I mean, we pay taxes. It's sort of, why shouldn't it be ours, and so on. And in that discussion with the Tate at the time, and this entrance space, the so-called Turbine Hall, the architects who are good friends of mine, Herzog de Mont, they were interested. They're from Switzerland. They sort of understand public. So I sort of studied what is going on in that space, and out of that, the idea of the weather being a space, like the city has its weather, and if you don't know what to talk about, if we didn't have an agenda, if you were not prepared, we would talk about the weather, for instance. So the weather sort of constitutes a social kind of comfort or safe space in which we can get to know each other and then gradually sort of break into harder arguments. But this idea that the weather holds a social construction in which we can then have a little dance until we decide to what are we going to think about each other. And there's, historically and so on and so forth. So it actually was an idea that I was hoping to sort of claim the turbine hall into the realm of the public. You can say it's like the buffer between the museum and the street. And is it leaning to the museum or is it leaning to the street? Right? And I was like trying to push it out to the street, saying the weather is on the inside. And I think that's what happened. And obviously I had not seen how, it was amazing because for me, I was so surprised as anybody, how people would sort of own the space and they would sort of occupy it. They would bring their own agendas, they would bring picnics. One brought a canoe and it was like yoga classes, but also like kind of apocalypse, like really dreary. So people are like the new life beginning and the life ending, right? And they were like side by side. And they were like, and I was very curious about the fact that people were disagreeing, but they were not excluding each other, which is so rare.
Up next, the art of activism. Olafur Eliasson on inspiring people to get involved in the fight against climate change and the power of hope.
I think fear-based sort of motivation is counterproductive to societal collaboration. I work with hope. I'm very interested in what's the shape of hope.
Olafur Ellisson's works possess an extraterrestrial element, but his focus is very much on this planet. His work, Ice Watch, placed climate change on humanity's doorstep. From the city of London, we watched tons of ice from Greenland melt before our very eyes in the span of days. The project was a massive undertaking. Immense blocks of ice were harvested from a fjord outside Nuuk, Greenland. Each block of ice weighed between 1.5 and 6 tons. But Ellison did this in the most responsible way possible. The ice had already been lost and was melting in the ocean. The public could put their hands on the ice and feel how fragile it was as the December sun in London melted it away to nothing but puddles. Through decades of his work highlight the issue of climate change and a fragile planet. But his passion for the planet isn't just in his art. He founded a social business, Ellison, which provides clean, affordable energy to communities without access to electricity and encourages sustainable development. But what made Olafur Eliasson so passionate about this topic, and how can art change minds? What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Become a climate conscious and activist-driven person much earlier. It's a funny thing because I often do the experiment when I teach or also just in my studio when working. Let's just imagine that we're sitting in 20, 30, 40 years from now, knowing what we know roughly is going on. What would we tell ourselves? And that's not the experiment. The experiment is to see, is there a discrepancy between what we know we have to do and what we are doing? Because the truth is, there is. We know very well what to do. We know what the science tells us. We know what the world is going to look like. We know everything. There's nothing, almost nothing that we don't know. And why are we not acting accordingly?
Why?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it too. I mean, I think it has to do with, it is a mind construct, or it's an idea that is so disembodied. There's so little physical, should I say, response to it. First of all, I think we are changing a lot all the time, right? So it's not like we're not doing anything. And I think that I have changed a lot the last 10 years as well. But I still think, why are we not deviating from the comfort of the repetitive kind of routines into doing things different? It's a good question. It's a good question.
Do you think there's change?
Oh yeah,
Slow?
massive. There's really big change. And I'm working with a behavioral psychologist, Elke Weber, who sits on the IPCC board, the climate board that the UN has done, the one who does the report that the cops are working with. She's a behavioral scientist, and she works with the so-called fear-based narrative and positive-based narrative. What is going to what is more likely to promote change of behavior, right? Is it scaring you, or is it actually giving you some hope? What is the stronger indicator? And of course, now I'm generalizing a little bit because we all know to a large extent the inconvenient truth that Al Gore did. That was a fear-based film. It's going to be all very bad unless you do so and so, right? But it also, in some way, he as a person being, and this is also generalizing, he's actually quite a hopeful person. Like Desmond Tutu would say, he's a prisoner of hope, you could almost say, right? So it was fear-based, but it was not quite as this. So I think fear-based sort of motivation is counterproductive to societal collaboration, because people tend to also do things on the expense of each other instead of on behalf of each other. So I work much closer to what the so-called, I work with hope. I'm very interested in what's the shape of hope? And I don't mean faith-based sort of hope. I mean, well, how do we bring about an imaginary future where tomorrow is better than yesterday? If we're going to inspire people to go to tomorrow and not back to yesterday, so it's like progressive or conservative, you could say. So how is that going to happen? What is tomorrow going to look like? What's the imaginary sort of tools?
That's what, solar panel? Is it concrete things, or is it more of just a different world?
Well, it's more like a sense of confidence. Well, if I do this, I'm actually going to be happier. I'm going to be more safe. My kids are going to be better. I'm going to have a better world. I'm going to be generally able to host people who I don't agree with, maybe even. Right. So I'm just saying. So a fear-based narrative would be like doom and gloom, end of the world. If you do not do it, I will come and I will punish you in a way. And then of course, yesterday was much nicer. Just like 10 years ago, it's like everything was like so comfortable. Why don't we go back to 10 years ago? So that's the climate deniers who says, no. It's all going to be fine. It's going to be this. This is all going to, blow up. So this notion of how do we talk to each other in a way where hope is seeded. And I think some art, and obviously art, there's like no rules here, but I would like to think that this is a worthwhile pursuit. One great climate conscious person who I just find so incredibly inspiring is the former Prime Minister of Ireland, Mary Robinson, who I find her so inspiring. She's very precise on her, idea of if there is no hope, it is so difficult to motivate people. And I see, of course it sounds like a little esoteric when you say art is about hope, but there's some truth to it. If we do not have any hope, it's very hard to motivate people.
What will you do in the next 5 years?
Well, I hope I will keep evolving as an artist. And having said, I really believe in a positive, optimistic, hopefully not too too naive, well, a little less naive than I am now, maybe. But I really very much would like to see if I can expand my argument and reach a broader audience, even and work with that. That fascinates me a lot.
Olafur Eliasson, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I was actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
If all the diseases have been taken, I'll take a tax.